Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. This is Coach Jeremy here, and doing a little podcast for all of you studiers who are working on studying for your licensure exam, your NCE, your CPCE, and of course, this is one that applies not only to these exams, but into so many others and so many other areas of therapy. And today we are going to dive into the helping relationships section, which is still a big, or maybe arguably the biggest part of this exam. And also within that, what might be considered one of the biggest theories in the exam as well. So saddle up, buckle your seatbelts, because we're going to dive right into it. We're talking CBT and REBT. These are two types of therapies I always like to talk about in the same sentence, in the same breath, or in this case, in the same podcast. Because let's be honest, when it comes to anyone who's in therapy to begin with, what are they possibly in there for? Because of how they're thinking. And usually they're not coming in with positive views of thinking, they're coming with negative views of thinking. So, what does that mean as a counselor? We got to work on that. And with CBT, that's not only a broad area, but it's also broad from the standpoint of theorists. You know, people always say, well, who is this? Well, if you look at the Hellwig book, there's a whole army of people. Wolpe, Meckenbaum, Beck, Bandura, Ellis. Remember that name for a second. Those are a few of them. Now, keep in mind with CBT, I always tell people, obviously, this negative stinking thinking, uh, polarized thinking, mental filtering, overgeneralization, jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing, personalization, blaming. And of course, with CBT, what we're trying to do here is replace some of those negative thoughts with positive and constructive thoughts, thought records. You know, again, I go back to this whole broad spectrum of, you know, what this is, negative thinking. And of course, this is so broad from the standpoint that I always sometimes say if you have a question on the exam and you are so lost, you can't even narrow it down to any of them, or you can't eliminate any of the options, and CBT is an option, may not be a bad option to go with because, again, why is anyone in therapy to begin with? CBT. And again, the goal of counseling, identify antecedents of behaviors and the nature of the reinforcements maintaining that behavior. The counselor helps create learning conditions and may engage in direct intervention. Goals of therapy are likely to be behaviorally stated. And again, counseling techniques may include operant and classical conditioning, social modeling, problem solving, direct training, reinforcement, and decision making. Again, with CBT, we have a thought. What we think affects how we act and feel. And then through that, we've got two split offs. We've got the emotion, what we feel affects what we think and do, and what we do affects how we think and feel. Your thoughts, your feelings, behaviors, all connected in this cycle. CBT, the stimulus response and stimulus organism response basic theories. And of course, with CBT, we got a full army of people. And basically, we're trying to work with this negative thinking, replace it with more positive and constructive views of thinking. Now, if you have a good memory or even a short memory, you can recall that when I was talking about some of the people that represent the full army of CBT people, well, one of those names is Albert Ellis, which is where I'm leaping towards, which again, when I said out, a full army of people in CBT, in REBT, rational emotive behavioral therapy, he's the one guy. So what did he do? You know it. He leaped. He jumped over into his own idealism REBT, based on the philosophy that it is not the events we experience that influence, but rather it is our interpretation of those events. That is important. If it sounds similar, it is. However, there's a few distinct and important characteristics that you're going to want to know because on the exam, not knowing these could flip you into going one way and not the other. And it's a good, if you want to talk about a good trick question, if I'm an examiner, this might be something I might be licking my chops over. So we'll get some examples in a second. But basically, individuals have the potential for rational thinking. In childhood, we learn irrational beliefs and re-indoctrinate ourselves on a continuing basis. This leads to inappropriate affect and behavior. Now, I mentioned negative thinking and stinking thinking in CBT. Our EBT is more specific, both from a naming and a labeling standpoint and from a technique standpoint. When you hear the name crooked thinking, that should set off red bells and sirens that it's REBT. Crooked thinking, CROOKED. Now, when you think about negative thinking, isn't that kind of basically what that is about? Yes, you're absolutely correct. However, it's called crooked thinking in REBT and REBT only. Just like if soda and pop, I don't know where you're all listening, but sometimes in certain areas of the country, you might say the word soda or pop, and if the other person's used to the other word, they're going to think that you're, you know, that you don't know what you're talking about, but you're referring to the same thing. So there you go. Crooked thinking. Now, the technique, the ABCDE approach, that is in REBT and REBT only. So what is it, you might ask yourself? Well, A, external event. B, belief in the form of self-verbalization. C, consequent event, which may be irrational or irrational. D, disputing of the irrational belief, which is causing the affect behavior. And E, effective cognitive, which is a change in self-verbalization. Now, that's the Hellwig render. This is, I think, maybe a more interpretation way of saying it. In life where things just seem to pile up. This happens and that happens and this happens. And because this happened, I'm telling myself this and I'm feeling this. So what do I got to do? I got to remind myself, okay, well, Coach Jeremy, this was just a bad day. You picked a bad day to have a bad day and this happened. So I feel better about myself and believe it a different way. Almost like you're pushing the dominoes in a different direction. REBT, those type of things. So negative event, rational belief, healthy negative emotion, negative event, irrational belief, unhealthy negative emotion. So again, that's the pathway of this. And so techniques, problem solving techniques used to address the activating events, cognitive restructuring techniques used to respond to the beliefs, and coping techniques used to fight the consequences. Basically, kind of everything that takes place in the ABCD approach, we're going to utilize in this form of therapy to help, to fix. And again, the masturbations, the shoulda, coulda, woulda, that type of language, the stuff that basically is, what we're told as kids, saying that to yourself is, we don't have access to time machines. So, to say what we would have thought then if we would have known now, which is again, irrational beliefs and negative ways of thinking. Again, very similar to CBT, but specific. So, Albert Ellis, REBT. So there you go. Again, that is Coach Jeremy with a little rundown of a few big things to know from the NCE and CPCE from the Helping Relations section, taken right from the Hellwig book. And CBT and REBT, things that you want to definitely be aware of, understand the difference of, and being able to really recognize through recall, recognition, when you're going through these questions, practice questions, and taking your NCE and CPC exam and being successful and gaining some valuable points that could help you pass the next time you take it online or take it in the Pearson Center. Coach Jeremy signing off with Academic Coaching World Changers. Hope you all had a fantastic day and good luck.